You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. Whether it's for food, fuel, drinks, or snacks, about half the U.S. population shops at a convenience store every day. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
Welcome to Convenience Matters. My name is Jeff Lenard with NACS.
And I'm Carolyn Schnare, also with NACS.
So, Carolyn, sometimes we have niche subjects, something that may not appeal to everybody. And I guess maybe you could say today is only of interest if you either own a car or own a credit card. So I guess that means everyone.
Everybody.
So today we talked about if you own a car, if you own a credit card, if you fill it up, this is a podcast you want to listen to. And joining us today is Joshua Smith. He's the CEO and founder of Gas POS. And we're going to talk about some of the issues related to what goes on at the gas pump. So welcome, Joshua.
Cool. Thank you all so much for having me.
So one of the things that let's just start off, one of the things that we know related to the pumps is all of the issues related to EMV and what's going on. The originally EMV deadline had passed. It's been moved to October 2020. I just used a whole bunch of acronyms there. Can you first even explain what EMV is, why it was moved, and why we should care?
Absolutely. So at a high level, EMV is the chip that is in your credit or debit card that your bank has issued to you. We should care about it because 40 million Americans a day use electronic methods of payment to purchase fuel, and EMV is a tool that we use to prevent in-person card fraud. If for some reason a malicious third party or a hacker was to get a hold of your credit card information, if the chip is used, if your card is supposed to have a chip, and they try to use it by swiping it and don't have the chip there, then the transaction will be declined. So it's an important fraud prevention tool.
And when you kick around the internet, of course, it's always you find things that are kind of wrong. And can you do a little myth busting for us? Because one of the things that you'll see when you look at things online is they say it's been moved to October 2020 in terms of EMV at the gas pump. And people, some folks are out there saying, well, it's just because they can make more money or because they don't feel like doing the upgrades.
And the previous deadline was October of 2017.
Right.
Okay.
But the real issue is there's so many gas pumps, and it's very complicated because unlike, say, a POS at a grocery store or any sort of retail, what that has to do, all it has to do is a financial transaction. But meanwhile, at the pump, it has to do a financial transaction plus, dispense a liquid. So that's really the reason that this has been moved back, and there are some other issues, aren't there?
There absolutely are. Your ATM would never spray a flammable liquid at you. And so there's a little bit more complex than a traditional retailer. In 2000, October of 15, when the EMV mandate was implemented at most retailers, the cost was a few $100s per car terminal. For a gas station, you're running, $6,000 up to the cost of a new fuel dispenser, which could be, $17,000 or more, depending on your options and features and things. And to kind of underscore the magnitude of what's happening, these calls, what's going on at the stores or the gas stations these days, along with EMV compliance and other payment upgrades, the biggest change to the electronic payment system in its 60-year existence. That's huge. Even when they think it's even bigger than transitioning away from knuckle busters, where people may remember you to place your card, and then they would run a piece of carbon paper over the top of it, into being able to electronically authorize the transaction. So it's a huge change. The stores are on the hook for over $6 billion And, when pay at the pump was first invented, it was very large organizations, brands people know like Shell and Chevron and Phillips, icons of industry, and a huge chunk of the Fortune 10 that was making these investments. But people don't realize that today our industry is made up of small business people. 70% of the stores are small business owners. And to have to come out of pocket the cost of a house, and to only be able to maybe finance it over 3 to 5 years is a huge investment. I mean, how many people would buy houses if their only option was a 3-year note at 12%? So, I mean, it's a huge undertaking, and it's, our neighbors and our community members that are making this investment for all of our benefit.
Now, Joshua, you talked about the investment. I mean, it's huge. And let's say you're a gas station, you have, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4 dispensers, probably more. What's the cost? What is the actual cost? Are there numbers associated, like from just a basic, I don't know, I guess a retrofit, if that's possible, to a straight up complete replacement, correct?
Absolutely. So if you had 4 dispensers, the best option out there is about 6 times 4 is 24 plus installation, so probably 30 to 40,000. And depending on the manufacturer, the gas pumps you have, how old they are, that cost very well could be the cost of a new dispenser, where you're looking between 80 to 100,000 for your 4 pumps by the time it's all said and done. And that's just the actual cost of the hardware. That doesn't factor in the cost to the business owner of having to shut their store down, and the labor, the pulling permits, and other things that can go into this discussion.
Now let's talk about like the other costs of not being compliant. Let's say it's November of 2020 and you're not compliant. What kind of costs could a retailer incur, whether it's a hard cost or even a soft cost?
So I believe this is, we talk about myth busting. I think this is one of the dirty secrets that oftentimes isn't talked about. So this is going to kind of split the industry into what we would call branded versus, obviously unbranded locations. The point of an EMV transaction, or the kind of the financial hook that the card brands and the banks use to get this transaction to happen, is what they call a liability shift. So people are very used to, like, you go in the store, you would swipe your card and you would sign a ticket or sign your receipt. And that would be all the merchant needed to say, hey, we did what we were supposed to. If there was a fraudulent transaction, we're not on the hook for this. And then, starting in October of 15, inside of retailers, they said, no, you need to accept the chip, or else we're going to shift the liability for fraud onto your store, as opposed to it going back to the bank. Now, the thing about gas pumps are that for unbranded retailers, they've always been on the hook for card fraud. Because you could never sign the receipt at a gas pump, especially at the before, you swipe it, you get a pre-auth, and then you run the transactions. So, really, unbranded retailers, can take a look at their card transactions. They can take a look at their chargebacks, take a look at where they are geographically. There's certain areas that are more likely and prone to fraud than others. And they should see kind of, what does my chargeback liability look like today? And then for the branded retailers, historically, not the card organizations, but the oil companies have held the risk of the chargebacks. And so there is a hard liability shift there, where, Shell, for instance, is no longer going to cover the liability for chargebacks at the pumps if they don't accept EMV. So for the cost of the retailers, it's largely dependent geographically of your store. What do your customers look like? Or what's the customer profile, I should say. It doesn't have anything to do with their physical appearance. And
Right.
Then also, what type of relationship do you have with your your oil marketer or the brand you represent?
And one other thing, just for folks who don't own stores and are interested in the conversation, chargebacks are when you may have done everything right and there's nothing wrong with a transaction, but you dispense gas and you don't get paid. So it's the equivalent to your bottom line as that person came in and stole your gas and left.
Absolutely. One of the major downsides to this EMV shift was what they called friendly fraud. And there's really nothing friendly about someone stealing from you, but it was people that in a community that would make a purchase and then not pay for it. So it's very similar. It's basically you are being stolen from.
Mm-hmm. And I love the phrasing, like friendly fraud. That's really a bad thing. We saw one of the articles that you wrote recently use the phrase security carousel, and you think carousel, weed, kids, fun, grab the golden ring. If you're really old, you might know what that means. But security carousel really applies to the idea that even after all of these changes, even after all of these costs, that doesn't necessarily mean that things are cool in terms of ending all these problems that EMV is stated to end, right? There's more going on.
There absolutely is. The security carousel is definitely a pejorative term. There's no free rides when it comes to payment security. And EMV, like I said, is a tool to prevent in-person card fraud. But what it absolutely doesn't do is stop cards from being stolen in the first place. And, going back to my philosophy background, if you use Occam's razor, when you're thinking through a problem, you should always get to the base of it. What's the simplest, easiest solution to a problem, and you should embrace that. And unfortunately, the EMV really isn't that. So what we talk about is that we should embrace encrypting technology and other things that actually secure card data and make it much harder to steal card information, because the more you can limit access to card data, the less fraud there will be, because there's nowhere else to use the stolen data, because you can stop it at the point of production as the point of trying to stop it at the point of consumption.
So literally we're talking about a Band-Aid.
Yes, I would say that's absolutely true. And the other negative consequence of this, and it's very poignant for our industry, is, some people may remember back early, 2010, 2009, people talking a lot about PCI compliance. Now, PCI compliance is a very broad topic, and it's something that all retailers are contractually bound to uphold, or anyone that accepts electronic payments. But, in our industry, it became, hey, I need to be PCI compliant, so that means I need to get encrypting PIN pads for my gas pumps, or a new PIN pad for inside my store. I may need to upgrade my point of sale system to accept this. And that people, kind of didn't embrace that change, because they always fear that there's something else down the horizon. One marketer said, it's the second rat that gets the cheese. So I'm not going to jump in feet first. And that, unfortunately, is the negative downside of these kind of Band-Aid solutions, is that we don't holistically solve the problem. And we don't get to the core of the issue. And, EMV is great for what it was designed to do. In Europe, for instance, when chip cards were first invented, they didn't have the same communication infrastructure that we have in the U.S. And so sometimes you couldn't necessarily get a real-time authorization for the cards. So the cards themselves, by getting the chip data, could prove, hey, this is a valid card and it's good for purchases. We don't have that problem, and even really at gas stations, Visa and MasterCard did an amazing job of limiting card fraud, especially when you throw PIN debit into the mix. A huge percentage, probably 7 in 10, if not, definitely greater than 6 in 10 cards are done on debit cards nowadays. And by getting someone's PIN, it achieves the exact same validation that you would get through a chip. So it's an interesting problem, and it's one that has a very long-term ROI.
So now, I mean, the one thing, we'll go ahead, everybody will get everything fixed, everybody will be compliant, but is it possible that the bad guys will just keep getting badder and they'll find the next thing that we'll have to worry about? Like looking 20, 30 years in the future, do you expect this will be something we'll be talking about again of, hey, let's change
Or
what
5
we just...
years in the future.
Who knows, that we just fixed this and now we got to fix it again. But talk about that for a second if you can.
Absolutely. So more dirty secrets.
That's going to be the title of the show, Dirty Secrets.
I know.
Might be a different audience.
So, but a large way. So EMV has a shelf life in its own right, and what I mean by that is that there is software inside the payment devices themselves. That people can deploy in their fuel dispensers. Or fuel pumps if they have suction pumps. And those software versions have end-of-life dates. For instance, if your device that you're going to purchase is PCI, what we call 3.x, it's version 3, and then there were sub-versions after that. If it is some flavor of PCI version 3, it's actually going to expire. Its usable life will end in April 2020. And the only way you would be able to deploy those devices is if you bought a bunch of them and warehoused them. A similar analogy would be if the iPhone, if you have an iPhone 7, it would be buying a bunch of iPhone 7s so that you had those when the iPhone 10 came out, you could still use it. No one would ever do that. Like, it's insane. But that is one of the options that's available to retailers. And so it's wildly important that as people contemplate these decisions over the next 18 months or so, that they kind of ask the hard questions of their equipment provider and say, hey, what version of PCI compliance has this device been certified for? What is the lifespan of what we call the kernels, or the kernel is the operating system that's inside the device, not to be confused with popcorn kernels. Actually, I don't know the shelf life of a popcorn kernel, but I imagine it could probably less than 5 years. Maybe more, just not sure. But, basically making sure that they know, hey, this is something that I can hang my hat on. This is something that I can feel safe with. And I honestly believe that, and you should always not trust people that say, honestly, I believe X. Sorry, so that's kind of a tell. But yes. The bad joke aside. No, but I believe that at some point, encrypting the information is going to become wildly important. The problem, and there are some issues with encryption, that the file sizes are bigger, or the data is more, because you're masking it, especially as you start getting into 256-bit encryption and other things. But the chances of breaking into a 256-bit encrypted piece of data, it would take like millions of years for a normal computer to do that. It's kind of the brilliance behind the blockchain or cryptocurrency, is that there's always a certain amount and a pre-known amount, and it becomes progressively harder to get more of them as the algorithms get bigger. And so the same is true for encryption. And so if I was to pull the crystal ball out, I believe the next thing down the horizon will be, an encrypting method of payment. And then also some interesting technology that's coming around is biometrics. Now, this is very kind of weird, 1984-ish, but there's already specifications in place to use, a thumbprint or other biometric data to make purchases.
Well, it exists on your phone, so it looks at your face, it looks at your thumb, it does things like that. So I think it's something that people might be pretty comfortable with. It's less the future for a lot of people. Me, yes, because my iPod is hack proof. I'm really proud of that. And then people say, "What's an iPod?" So
he does. He has an iPod.
Yeah.
Nice. That's awesome.
So one thing is, as we talked a lot about the future, and there's long-term future, 5 years, 10 years, but the more immediate future is October 2020, and that is a real deadline. What does a retailer really need to pay attention to between now and 2020 if they haven't already? What are the things that they should be doing right now? And is there anything that anybody that goes to the gas pump should think about between now and 2020?
For the consumers, it's business as usual. The cards, when you insert them, regardless of the card reading device that's in the pumps, it's going to read your MACS strip. So there's not a lot of concerns for the consumers. A lot of retailers have embraced alternative payment methods, whether that's in a mobile wallet or that is through an ACH card, and they will offer discounts and promotions to get the consumers to use those payment methods. And so that's something absolutely worth checking out and taking a look at. And then for the retailers, I would say the main thing to do, especially over the next year or so, as they start preparing to make these decisions, is ask those hard questions. Give us a thorough site survey. Make sure you know the type of equipment you have, what your upgrade options are. Make sure you understand the PCI lifespan of the devices that you're buying. And then also do a thorough analysis of if you're an unbranded retailer, what do your chargebacks look like today? What risks do you have? Are there insurance products that you could purchase, a cyber liability policy, for instance? And what is the cost of one of those products as opposed to updating your dispensers? One of the saddest things that we've heard out in the field is that there are people contemplating either shuttering their stores or, making decisions that will affect their bottom line by maybe not accepting cards at the pump because they can't afford the upgrades. And so I believe that there is opportunities, to kind of address some of that. And then the other thing, kind of prudent would be to plan ahead, and take a little bit of money and set it aside just to make sure that, a couple of years from now, when you do make these investments, that you are in line and that, you have the funds available. And then I would say the last thing is once you have asked the hard questions is to go ahead and kind of start making a decision. So that way, where you stand in the marketplace. Because one of the things that absolutely can happen is if everybody waits to the last moment to make these decisions, then it could, there's going to be a backlog because there's, a finite limit to manufacturing capabilities that, people can deploy. And then there's also a finite number of installers, that can go out and do this and are certified to do this work. So those would be kind of my best guesses on that part.
And I'll give one more piece of advice as we wrap up here. Grab a pen because we're going to throw out some websites now. First off, NACS has a standards group called Connexus, Connexus.org. Connexus with one N, two X's. NACS website, convenience.org/skimming, has information on skimming. Joshua, give us the gas POS website because obviously you know this issue. They will know how to find more on the issue.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find us at gaspos.co or .co, and you can Google gas POS, and you'll have a great chance to find us. And yes, it's gaspos.co.
And also, somebody with a philosophy degree in gas stations. Look for that slogan, gas station philosopher. I think you have a future there.
Thank you very much. I didn't waste most of my early college career, it sounds like.
Well, thank you, Joshua, for joining us, and thank you for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.